All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Exploring Business Journalism panel. We're going to be covering a variety of topics. And so we'll touch on points that will be relevant to newcomers to business journalism and people who are veterans, whether we're talking about veteran journalists or veteran business journalists who just want more perspective about this part of the industry and have just general questions that come up now, especially at a time when the tariff is the topic that is touching just about everything that you cover. I'm Diane King Hall. I'm your moderator today. I'm an anchor and reporter for a streaming network, Schwab Network. I've been at a variety of the business places and general news places, CBS, Yahoo Finance, New York One back in the day. As you can tell, that has a special place in my heart. And I want to quickly name off our panelists, and I'll have them do an introduction of themselves. So we have Quinette Carey, who's with Bloomberg. We have Jordan Holman, who is with the New York Times now. That took me a second because I remember from where she was before, even though she's been at the New York Times long enough for me to have that lodged in my head. And we also have Taylor Nicole Rogers, who's with the Financial Times. Quinette, why don't you start out with just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So thank you. I am a senior producer at Bloomberg Television. So I'm not, writing financial news in the traditional sense, and then I'm just producing business television. But my whole career, the majority of my career was spent at Fox News. We can, get in that later. But I sort of got my bearings in that world first. And then, things happened and the world changed and I decided to do something different. But when I graduated, I went to Tufts. I studied economics and American studies there. I actually started at Citigroup before I went to Fox News and now at Bloomberg. So there's been a vein of some sort of just sort of business life, news and markets with me for some time now. But yeah, I'm a mother of two. I'm married. I live in Nassau County, Long Island. I am a Girl Scout troop leader
Oh, wow.
and all around fun gal. Um,
Yes, I can attest to that. She's great in person, on screen. All right, Taylor, why don't you give a little bit of an introduction about yourself?
Well, I should start off by saying that I am a former Girl Scout, but I now work as the U.S. Labor and Equality correspondent for the FT. So I write a lot of different kind of business and economic stories, whether that is workplace trends, hiring trends. It can be stories about small businesses and just different kind of economic stuff. Recently, I've written a lot about the food sector and how that is impacting Main Street with the bird flu and the tariffs and all of those different things. So it's kind of a wide and unusual type of beat, but it's really fun because I essentially just try to tell how the biggest business stories of the day are impacting underrepresented communities.
I love that, especially the price of eggs. Um, all right, Jordan, you're next up.
Hey everyone. Unfortunately, I do not have a connection to Girl Scouts. So you guys got to leave that to the other panelists. But I'm
it's
Jordan
not too
Holman.
late.
I actually feel good about that because one of my favorite movies growing up was Troop Beverly Hills. So that's
Yeah.
the beginning of it. But so I'm a business journalist at the New York Times. Started my career at Bloomberg. So I also have always been in this business journalism space. Uh, this panel is like so timed in a fun way. I'm actually in the like a transition of beats right now. So for the past 6 years, I was covering the retail industry through all of the pandemic of it all and the inflation and whatnot, and obviously with what's happening now with tariffs. But now I'm transitioning beats, and I am taking over the corner office column at the Times. It's a long held column at the Times focused on CEOs. And so I'm now covering the world of CEOs and decision makers at a very interesting time to be making decisions. So I can speak to all of the different elements of covering business. Even before I was covering retail, I was on the Muni Bonds team at Bloomberg
Uni
and covered
bonds.
hotel insurance.
Wow.
I see some nods here, so we can chat about that. But I've just been blessed to have like a wide range of experience of coverage when it comes to business.
That's amazing. Also, first of all, congratulations on the transition of covering the corner office. That's
Thank you so
awesome.
much.
All right, Queenette, tell us a little bit about your entry points into business news. What was it that attracted you, made you interested, and then what you wish you knew coming into it?
All right. Well, so as you know, I started out at Fox News. So I was really only doing politics and foreign policy, and I did that for quite a while, for about a decade. Um, and point blank, it's the political environment became really tense, right? Like really tense, really heated, incredibly partisan post 2016. And that got very old for me, right? Like at one point it became been there, done that, got the t-shirt, sent the postcard, right? Like grew kind of tired of editorializing, right, that much. And I really wanted to pivot into something that felt a little bit more absolute. And there's nothing more absolute sort of than the markets, right? Like the equity is doing what it's doing. The stock price is here. This is why. This is what some people think may happen next. This is what could change a trajectory, and we're done, right? Like that is what Bloomberg is all about. They are the farthest, right, from editorializing. Jordan would know. It's sort of like, here are the facts. Here's what the market is doing. You decide, right, what to do with your portfolio, right? They do not want to sway you in either way. And it was sort of the other end of the spectrum, the other side of the spectrum from Fox News. What I wish I knew was everything, right? Like I did not know markets at all. I did work for Lou Dobbs for some time. I was his senior booker, but this was not the Lou Dobbs that was at CNN. When he got to Fox Business, he was a little bit more foxy. And his show was at 7 o'clock at night. Markets, been closed for a few hours. And so I did not come to Bloomberg with heavy markets knowledge at all. I'm sure at some point we'll get into that, but it was indeed intimidating. And so I had to lay a foundation for myself. I really just sort of read books and talked to people and watched Bloomberg before I got to Bloomberg, and watched our competitors. Because what the conversations are really sort of what help you. It's kind of like school. It's like you go to school and you learn a ton, but it's school, right? You're learning out of textbooks. You don't really have any skin in the game. But when you're listening to the coverage, when you're listening to the analysts and the economists and the CIOs, talking about what they're doing and why and what they're expecting and the headwinds and the tailwinds of the business, it puts a more sort of digestible spin on the news itself. And so I much prefer to watch the CNBCs of the world and of course, Bloomberg first, CNBC only late at night when I'm trying to go to bed. But right, I'm on Team Bloomberg for life at this point.
Right now, we're a community. There's some variety of
community.
business journalists. I understand you got to put your,
always
home team first.
But I watch, but whether it's, at night or in the morning, I do watch. And of course on the job, right, learn just through osmosis, essentially, right? The terminal is a magic box. If anyone here ever gets the opportunity to get access to the terminal, the data licenses alone are what, make it, this incredibly valuable property. And then of course they have this expansive newsroom of journalists who are writing all the time across the globe, really fantastic coverage. And so I won't say it was easy. It certainly wasn't quick. The learning curve was sharp. And I am still learning. But yeah, I mean, that's why I left Fox. I wanted something that was more direct, absolute, less editorializing. And what I wish I knew was I wish that I maybe had learned a little bit more about the markets before I got there.
Okay. The Bloomberg way.
The Bloomberg way.
I know. Yep. All right, Taylor, tell us about your starting point as well and what you wish you knew getting into this.
So I actually completely fell into business journalism by accident. I had absolutely zero interest in business or economics. And what happened was I had applied for an internship through the Dow Jones News Fund program in a different topic area, and then by like a series of miscommunications missed the window to accept the one that I was offered. By the time I got in touch with them, they were like, that one's gone, but you can do this other business program if you would like. And I was like, I just need a summer internship, so sure, whatever, I'll give it a try, and completely fell in love with it, and the rest is history. um so I what I wish I had known was uh obviously just like how the markets worked. That would have been really helpful going into an experience like that. But I think more importantly, I wish I had realized how much business topics and business news means to people outside of Wall Street. Because I think I thought it was all like very dry and things that like my friends and family weren't impacted by or did not care about. And that could not be further from the truth. I mean, like we were just talking about like the price of eggs, that was a big deciding factor in this election. And I think being able to tell stories like that is really incredibly valuable. And I also wish that I had known that you also get paid more to do business journalism than
You
other types of
do. Yes.
journalism. Yeah, I think the statistic is like there's like a 30% pay premium.
I didn't-
So I wish I had known that there were more opportunities here, and not just for your own financial gain, but for impact as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So I get that. Jordan, I want to hear your thought on both your entry point and what you wish you knew starting out.
Yeah, it's gonna be a combination of what y'all already heard, but it was the money. Okay, so I was a senior. I was about to be a senior in high school or in college, I mean, and I was interning at the Sun Times. I'm from Chicago, so loved being at the hometown paper. But that was like a really rough summer for them. They went through a few buyouts during my internship, and the only folks that weren't asked to leave essentially were the business journalists. So 21-year-old me was like, what's happening over here? I need to understand what you guys are doing that's making you so valuable. So got back to campus that fall and was like, I'm going to be a business journalist. Had no idea what that meant. But luckily it fell on the right ears. It was a professor who used to be at the Wall Street Journal. He was like, do you mean what you say? And I was like, I think I do. And he was the one who taught me what earnings were, how to read a balance sheet, and crucially told me that Bloomberg was coming on campus to recruit for their summer internship. And I'm truly mean this when I say I did not know what Bloomberg was. I knew who he was, but I
Mhm.
didn't understand the vast network of the terminal and all these kind of things. So then getting to the point of like what I wish I would have known, the terminal, what the little
Oh,
functions
yeah.
meant. Um,
Yes.
but
It's still a learning process to learn the terminal, even if you've had experience with it.
yeah, there's no way to know everything on there. But and I remember the first day of my internship, you're like trained on the terminal, but you're also trained on like the Bloomberg way. And I know we're throwing out all these phrases. It just means like how to write a very tight, quick to the point story without any fluff and very quickly. And I was just like very intimidated by this terminal. And I remember leaving that first day of the internship, texting my mom, like, I have no idea how this is going to go, but I'm going to do my best. And she said, that sounds like a good goal. And I wish I would have known early on that like everything can be learned. What is most important is being a strong writer. And I think even more so in business because there's so much jargon, there's so much
Yes.
jargon for the sake of being opaque.
Yes.
And if you're a strong writer, being able to just write it plain for people who don't feel like the business section is their section, that is going to cut through so much noise and like just make you a more valuable business journalist to audiences.
No, you make a great point because one of the things I used to do more of, but lately I've fallen into the jargon habit, is use a lot of analogies and, metaphors, for instance, to explain a concept because, especially for a general news audience, you need something like that to explain that to them, for something like now where tariffs are the topic that's affecting everyone and what's the overarching impact to people. Also can relate to you all's comments about the pay because my first position within the news business was same as yours, Jordan, that summer associate program, translation internship. It paid, and it paid better than, because there were also unpaid ones. It also paid better than anything else. So I was like, this is what I'm doing. So Quinette, I want to go to you about I want to hear your advice for people who want to gain the know-how and break through the jargon. I think we do have more tools nowadays than we used to have. Everyone doesn't have access to the terminal. And when you leave there, it's, some places just don't have a terminal. How do you gain the know-how? What are the resources that you use? You mentioned books. Just tick off a few.
Yeah. I mean, well, let me start by piggybacking on what Jordan said, is that it can be learned, right? So unless you're ready to concede that the millions and trillions of people who have done business journalism before you, who have worked at, at the Journal, at the FT, at all these other places, were so much smarter than you and so much sharper than you that they learned it, but you can't, that's simply not true. They did it, and so can you. It is intimidating. Yes, for me working on the television side, it's like, how, am I intimidated by jargon? No, because I don't mess with it, right? Like when I produce television, it is about making it digestible and accessible to a broad audience. Now, the Bloomberg audience in particular is pretty, high net worth, but I produce television for everyone, right? Like I can't only talk to the Wall Street Titans and the heads of hedge funds, right? Like I need to be able to talk to the mom and pop shops in Middle America. I need to be able to talk to day traders or at retail traders. I need to talk to a wide swath of America. And so I specialize in cutting through the jargon, right? Like I make sure myself and the producers who I work with that we do not use jargon at all, right? That we are using language, that we are breaking things down in simpler, accessible, and a little bit more sort of conversational terms, because it makes TV easier to watch. And so if you approach it in a way that, yes, it's confusing, and let me break this down for myself, it will make you a better producer, because then you can break it down in conversation and for an audience. But when I first got to Bloomberg, again, I'm telling you, that terminal is something else. They have something called Bloomberg, University or something on it.
Yeah,
And so there specifically, if you're there, there are, there are like resources. But I was living on Investopedia. I mean, it was coming up, I type IN into my web browser, and it's the first thing that comes up because it's all I was looking at. I was looking up every single term that I heard, a bond, a yield, a this, like an ETF. I was looking up everything. And once you get, how it is, it's like once you understand the concept, you understand, right? Like you start seeing how it fits into the market action. You see how it affects people, how it moves markets. It starts to make sense. But I mean, it's not going to drop into your lap or your head, right? Like you will have to look these terms up, and sometimes you have to look them up 10 times, right?
Yeah.
And read them in 3 different sources and 12 different ways before you can fully understand and get a 360 view of what it means and how it affects people and their money and their portfolios. So, I mean, my advice is to not be intimidated, be excited to learn what these things mean. Because you will sound obviously super brilliant in conversation, of course, and you'll impress everyone you come across. But once you understand it, it just makes it easier for you to write. And of course, it makes it easier for you to produce for television.
Okay. Taylor, I'm going to pose that question to you, just about either resources or advice you have for people to gain the know-how. I know one site I've used in the past, Investopedia. Nowadays we can Google or AI everything. But Taylor, what are resources that you recommend?
I think for me, so I also never had any like formal business, finance, economics background before doing this. And 6 years in, I feel like I'm still like learning every day on the job. But the resources I found the most valuable is like any opportunity that you can like get in a room with someone to tell you something. So the best experience I ever had was that Dow Jones program. So if you're in college, I would highly, highly recommend the program. It's fantastic for kind of learning how to break into business journalism. There's a textbook that they gave us and used in that program that I still consult regularly. It's called Show Me the Money by Chris Roush. That is a great kind of like intro book if you're just looking to understand like how these things work and then physically how you translate the information in SEC filings into news. That's really helpful. The Reynolds Center has a lot of online resources. Cebu does a lot of like
Oh,
webinars and
yeah.
things. So NABJ panels at our annual convention. So those things have been just the most helpful for me trying to ask someone a question like, "Can you explain this to me?" Like, I'm 5 years old.
I like that. And then Jordan, what's your thought on that in terms of advice or resources to just help learn the jargon and just kind of have a better handle on business news?
For sure. Yeah. Before I started my career at Bloomberg, I had an internship at Marketplace for the expressed purpose of understanding what the heck would be happening at Bloomberg. And I think Marketplace radio show with Kai Rizdal is a fantastic way to just to get into that, like the flow of the business news, what's happening on like Wall Street and the stock market being translated to Main Street and why you should even care. Um, so I still listen to that regularly. I like to see how their take on the news is different from what the Wall Street Journal or like the FT or like the Times would even write about. So that's really helpful. And then I mean I know a lot of books that I still consult were already mentioned, but I would just say there's a
Mention them.
wonderful yeah, it's like a wonderful world of podcasts that you should just listen to. Lots obviously is a good one. So you can go as wonky as you want if you're like trying to really understand a thing like ETFs or something like that. There's probably a podcast for you solely focused on that. But just try to like expose yourself to the conversation. And then if you are in a newsroom and maybe you're not on the business desk in the newsroom, like reach out to the business journalists
Yeah.
across the newsroom. Hear their war stories of '07 and '08 recession. You will learn a lot and you will hear echoes of today. And that's a lot of what I did when I started, just to know what it was like to cover. And it's helpful perspective for what the storylines are today, too.
Yeah. And I mentioned Investopedia, but I just want to reiterate the point that Jordan made. Don't be afraid to reach out, especially I know we're going to have time for questions later, but ask the question that you have. And if one doesn't have the answer, we probably know someone who has the answer to that question. Uh, the next question I want to ask each of you ladies is just how has your identity infused the way you approach work, especially as a Black person? Often we're not, in general newsrooms, we're often the minority, let alone in business newsrooms. Jordan, I'm actually going to start with you for this one. How do how does that infuse the way you approach your coverage?
I think that's like the only perspective I can have. Like me, a person who grew up in Chicago, whose parents didn't like work on Wall Street, just like grew up in the Midwest. I have to bring all of those perspectives. Or I've also lived in a lot of cities. I've lived in Chicago, LA, New York, Atlanta. Like just my lived experience is obviously going to inform my reporting. During the summer of 2020, I did a whole series on like the Buy Black movement. And it wasn't something that was assigned to me. It was just something I identified, realizing that a lot of people's response to wanting to show solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement after the killing of George Floyd was to redirect where they were spending their money. That is inherently a business story, and one that my colleagues weren't seeing.
Mm.
Um, and so that is so I was like, this is an important story. It might not be the like biggest finance story, but it's such an important way of how consumers were interacting with the economy type story. Or even last week, as I was saying, I'm starting this corner office column again, and I interviewed the CEO of QVC. And yes, I'm going in there asking all the questions about how tariffs will affect them. They have this new partnership with TikTok, just like kind of the demise of cable. But then when I'm asking him about like what was his upbringing like, how does that inform his leadership? He uh he explained like his family came from a sharecropping family,
Mm.
and just being able to like understand in shorthand all of the things he was saying, and then being able to know what the next question is, because my grandma is one of 10, also a sharecropping family, so it helps you relate with people. It also helps when you feel like you're have nothing in common with someone, it'll help you relate with them in that way too, because you're not, sometimes it is important to be like, what does that mean? I don't understand. Like, what is the shorthand you're saying? So you can use it in both ways. You can form a bond with people, but then you can ask the questions or take a beat that other people wouldn't be.
No, you make a great point, especially I think about a recent that kind of to me indicates how we would understand what is going on now was with the rollback of DEI and the impact Target is having with the boycotts there. They're actually recently calling a meeting with Al Sharpton. We would understand that right off the bat, whereas someone else who doesn't have our identity may not understand that. Taylor, what's your response to that question about how identity infuses how you approach?
Similar to Jordan, it just gives you a window into stories that the newsroom like otherwise would not be covering. Like, for example, I did this big project 2 years ago because I grew up in like suburban slash rural Tennessee. I was able to do this big project that was about banks closing bank branches in smaller cities across America after COVID, just because they realized that it was very easy to transition people to a more profitable, mobile digital banking model. Although, of course, we all know there's a lot of people who that doesn't work for. And so I was able to like go to these small towns in Mississippi and interview, business owners who were having to drive like an hour with cash from their restaurant, or senior citizens who didn't have a way to cash their social security checks, or just first time homeowners who had no idea how to get a mortgage and really needed to sit down and like talk that through with someone and did not have that opportunity because these banks were pulling out of smaller towns. And that in many ways is a Wall Street story, but it's not a story that my colleagues who grew up in and around Wall Street would have ever known and been able to cover in the same way. And that was a really great project that ended up winning awards. And that's a good example of something that like you would never see if you did it. Like I would have never seen if I did not have the experience of going home and noticing that there was no longer a bank where it had been when I was growing up. Um, but on the other hand, there are stories that I also can't get. Like the other day, there was I'll say a head of state that we were trying to profile about their economic policy. And in the finished story, we noticed that like one of my editors was posed with this person in their like college hockey team photo. And so like, that's not access that I'm ever gonna have to like be old college hockey buddies with out of state. But I think at the same time, I'm able to translate stories that are just as impactful to my newsroom. And every newsroom I've ever worked in has really, really valued that because, I mean, similar to Bloomberg, we have a lot of readers at the FT that are high net worth individuals or they're in corner offices and they're desperate to try to understand what's going on with American consumers. And who better to tell that story than someone who is actually close to like the average American consumer?
Yeah. And you may not have the hockey connection, but you'll be in those rooms and have those connections in the future. Quinette, what's your story on this about how your identity infuses how you approach?
Sure. Um, so the coverage, obviously I'm sort of hyper aware of how this affects how certain stories affect our communities. But more than that, working on the TV side, I am more concerned or equally or I'm concerned about the color of our coverage, right? And so I really want to make sure that we are always showcasing Black analysts, Black economists, or of color, right? It doesn't have to be Black, Latino, Latinas, just the people across the spectrum. I want to make sure that those voices are there too, because it's very easy to forget that they exist. When you're watching these networks, you'll see that a lot of people look a certain way. And
Yeah.
so making sure that the coverage reflects the fabric that is America, right, is incredibly important to me. And so you always need someone advocating for that. Because sometimes it's hard. You got to go looking for them and hunting for them and looking through their credentials and building the case as to why they deserve to come on your network, why maybe they've never done TV before, but why they deserve a shot. And so when you're in those rooms, you're able to make those decisions. If it is your goal, you have to be ready to make the case each and every time, right? To bring on these people who look like you in all of these different sectors, in companies that may not, have 800 billion assets under management, right? But their voices are still important to the story. Besides that, I'm also a hiring manager. And so helping to bring more diverse candidates into our pipeline means a lot to me. I'm invested in that as well. And so the coverage, how Bloomberg looks on TV and in the newsroom, are how I think I make the biggest impact when it comes to diversity.
Oh, I
Diane,
love
can
that.
I jump in there?
Yes.
Quick?
Jordan, go ahead. Jump in.
Yeah. Um, all of this being said, I think it's important to also mention this will mean that you will work harder in your newsrooms to do all of these things. I know that all four of us here work very hard in our newsrooms to put in this extra work that your colleagues sitting next to you are not thinking about or not doing. And I just want to like acknowledge that. And that's just also a reality of trying to do all that we're doing in this field.
I think you're right. I think that is still the case, that you still have to, unfortunately, work twice as hard to get half as much. I hate that that's still, and maybe it's not half anymore, but I do find that that is still. And I've been in business news for a little more than 20 years now. So yeah. I've got the battle wounds. Okay, I'm going to ask each of you just one more quick question and just a quick thought because I do want to give time for Q&A. I did want to hear your thoughts on like current news topics like tariffs, but we can read it or watch it on your networks. But let's talk a little bit about mentorship. How do people gain access in terms of mentorship to build relationships with potential mentors, especially because, for instance, Jordan, when we were talking earlier, there was a question about, well, who's your competition, basically? And this is not me as an individual, but like we work in a competitive business. I do find within our community, there's more of a, when I say our community, I mean the Black community, there's more of a lifting of each other up. But how do people gain that access to have mentorship, and then how do you operate as a mentor yourself? Either way you want to take that question. Taylor, I'll go to you first on this one.
Yeah, so for me, I've been just really, really blessed in that most of my mentors have been organic. They've been my editors or managers throughout my career. Unfortunately, that also means that all of them are white and all but one of them are men. So there's automatically that aspect that like they will never be able to understand of my career. But all of that withstanding, it's been really helpful for me to maintain and nurture those relationships because they also have huge, huge networks and lots of experience that like I just did not organically find in my communities when I was first getting into this. So, I mean, my advice would be to just try to nurture the relationships that are just organically in your path. I think that's probably the easiest way because I feel like people tend to know when you're trying to like get close to them to get something out of it. And I think people are often put off by like that transactional nature that networking sometimes has. And so I just try to think of it as like maintaining any other relationship that I would have in my life, like sending, constant
Mhm.
saw this and thought of you, or like, oh, loved what you just did type of things. And that way you can organically come back to people and ask for advice. And one thing I've also had to get over is not being afraid to ask all of the time for, what do you think I should do here? Can you proofread this story? Can you share a contact? I think I've seen in my friends that people are hesitant to constantly ask things of mentors, but I think business journalists in particular, like genuinely really kind and lovely people because it is a very, very small community. So whoever is in your path, don't be afraid to ask them.
Not all of them are generally kind. Sorry.
I think more kind than not.
I
Of
think
course, every
I will
newsroom has
say
its
yes,
personalities.
yes. And when I say that, I don't mean like this is across the entire spectrum of the industry when I say
Of
that.
course,
This
of
is
course.
not about people I've worked with. Quinette, as I launch a fireball to you, what's your thought on mentorship and your approach either with mentoring yourself
Mhm.
or seeking a mentor?
Sure. Well, you know, as Taylor said, you're absolutely right. I think people know when you are, uh, let me not say trying to use them, but when you're, looking to rub shoulders with them because you want something out of them. And I am all about seeking connection. And so while I do not advocate sort of stalking people, the internet is a resource. I look up everyone in my path. I meet you. I find you on LinkedIn. I poke around, I figure out where you're from, and I am unafraid when it comes to approaching people and, making, connections. Like I will find something in your, current, in your past, that I feel we can connect on. Like Taylor, I know you did some work with Big Brother, Big Sisters, right? And then you also told me just now that you're a former Girl Scout. We are, women obviously who want to give back. We're besties now, right? Like I'm going to find Taylor and start talking to her about these different civic organizations and why she's a part of them and what drives her and what drives me. And, obviously there'll be a ton of overlap there. This is what I do regularly, right? Like this is my way of networking. I look people up, I find mutual friends and things like that. And I find ways I find true connections, right? Like authentic connections. And I take it from there. When it comes to mentoring other people, I hold space for people in my head. Like I mentioned, just is what exactly what you want people to do, right? Is to speak your name in rooms, right? When you're not there. I make a point to do that, right? With younger TV producers and bookers and people who I work with, I make sure I'm always holding space for them and mentioning their names so that when opportunities come up, their names and their identities do not, fall to the bottom, never to be seen again, that they're top of mind for the people, for the decision makers, essentially, because they're doing great work, right? Why? Just because maybe they don't know everyone who's in the room or they don't know all of the people in the C-suite and all the decision makers, should they not be thought of, right? As people who are capable and should be given these opportunities. I make it, a point in all that I do to speak their names and hold space for them.
And Jordan, your thought on that subject?
I love it all. Yeah, you should treat like mentorship the same way you would with reporting, research, follow up, genuineness, like all of the things. I'll just throw in there like you should also be networking with your peers. Those are the people who are going to be rising up with you in the industry. Those are the people I text and I'm like, oh, it's been a day, or oh, this was crazy, wasn't it? Like those are also good people that you should be fostering those relationships. Um, as for as a mentee, make sure that the advice that your mentor gives you, you act on it. Like if they're like, hey, you should reach out to this person, do that today. You should consider this beat change Really think about that. I think it's so much, especially early in your career, early into a new beat or what have you. You're like, no, I have a vision for how this should go. But if someone's taking the time to share their hard fought path, and they're passing that down, like really take that seriously. You might not realize what it's for, like how it's going to set you up, but looking back, anytime that a mentor has given me advice, I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I followed that. And then it'll be cool once things kind of flip and you can start giving them advice. I don't know. It's happened like once in my mentor mentee relationships, but it's cool.
Or the relationship changes because one of my early mentors is now
Yeah.
a friend and like it's like
Yeah.
family friends. Okay, so we're gonna open the floor up to questions. I know there's at least 2 questions. Kiki asked a question in the chat. We'll answer. I think we kind of got into it. What advice do you have for someone who is basically math is not their strong suit and or interpreting data and stats, but they are interested in business journalism? I think you kind of answered that earlier, but if you have an extra thought, or Taylor, you have an extra thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, well, the math part, I'm not even sure I do much math. Cedric Jordan and Taylor may do a little bit more. Especially with earnings and things like coming out, the math is almost, done for you. It's really about understanding the concepts, interpreting the data and the stats. Yeah, I actually think the best way to do it is to find someone who's already in the business. I think Jordan said something like this earlier, who can explain it to you, right? Like, it is not easy to make your way through earnings releases and all of those stats. I mean, those things are very difficult to wade through. The easiest way to do that, I mean, if you know someone who works in the sector, who is an analyst, meaning they look at everyone, they look at all the businesses, in that, if you could be a retail analyst or defense or what have you, transportation. Those people have been in the business and know it well enough that they probably can interpret these things with their eyes closed. They can explain those things to you in a way, again, that is very easily digestible. And I mean, that would probably be my first resource, but do not worry about the math. You very rarely need a calculator in this business. It is more so about understanding the concepts themselves and how they move markets and what it means for people's financial soundness, essentially. So yeah, find someone in the industry who can break it down for you succinctly, because they do it every day.
I will say though, I use a calculator.
Oh,
So
you do? For
I
what?
use a financial calculator, HP
Percentage
10B2.
change.
Okay, yes,
But
yes.
I use
That's
it- I
all in the
use it-
terminal.
use
You'll
it
never
as-
look
You
at that
still
stuff.
have to have someone back read it. Like,
I use
did
it
I
an
do
app
this?
now instead of the actual, like, because I have my certificate in financial planning now. You had to take a class to learn how to use that calculator. But yeah, so I do think sometimes that's still useful. You don't have to, because look, but not everybody has the terminal. One
Sure.
other resource I'll mention to people: Wharton Seminars for Business Journalists. You can apply, you learn how to read earnings reports. That's one, just I recommend applying for that. And your company might sponsor you, because I worked for a company years ago that, I applied, and if I recall, they like sponsored me for it. So, that's something you can go for. Taylor, you had a thought on that?
Yeah. Just on seminars, Chicago Booth also has one. I've never done it, but I've heard really great things. I would actually posit that I don't think you need to be good at math to do business journalism. I am not a math person. It was always my worst subject. I'm very proud of the fact that I managed to graduate from college without taking a single math class. To Jordan's point, the only calculation I ever do is percent change, which there is just a very good, very simple percent. I think it's just percentchangecalculator.com. That is the
At
only calculation that I
google.com.
literally ever do.
I'll
Yeah.
write that one down. Percent change calculator.
Yeah. So you can just
You could
say
Google
like,
it. Yeah.
yes. So you can just say, like, if we're going to continue with the eggs example, eggs were $3, this time last year, and today they're $7, and it will calculate for you the percent change. And to prove to you that I'm bad at math, I don't even know what that is. I would pull it up for that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I had a mentor at Bloomberg. Her name is Karen Toulon. She's now at CNBC.
I
I
know,
remember
yeah, Kara's everybody's mentor.
everyone's mentor, Karen. But she said, business journalism isn't math. Not like numbers aren't math. Numbers are numbers. It's how the context you put around it. So even like kind of dispelling the idea that business journalism is math, it's like, no, there's just more numbers than there are in other stories, but it's about the context.
Yeah.
Truth, earlier you raised your hand. Do you still have a question, Truth? I'm asking you to unmute if you still have a question. If not, I'm going to move on because there are 2 more questions in the chat. Truth, go ahead.
Didn't raise my hand. I just clapped when someone said,
Oh, okay. You clapped when, what was it?
I think Jordan said like it's harder to, promote everything that everyone was saying, like in terms of like getting more Black sources and telling more stories that might impact your community. So I just clapped for that.
Aw.
Thank you.
All right. Along with the virtual clap, an out loud clap. Okay, there's a question. Should journalists be intentional or selective about their path, or should they consider opportunities that are outside of their preference? This can be in general and or where beats are concerned. I'll just take one answer on this because whoever wants to answer this of our panel, go ahead. Anybody? Or else I'm going to pick somebody.
Answer.
I'm on the TV sides. I don't know about beats really.
Taylor, go ahead.
Okay, I would say consider things outside of your path, because if I didn't, I would not have the career that I have today. I don't know what I would be doing, but I would not be in the position that I am today.
Okay, and then the next question, how long did it take you to learn the history of the industries you cover, or do you just learn the history as you go? Jordan, I'll start with you.
I learned the history as I went. A lot of that just comes from doing the earnings. I remember the first earnings cycle I had no idea what I was doing because you don't know what the company did the quarter before or whatnot. So you get that from learning, you get that from talking to people who've covered the beat, you get that from reading. I think it's kind of impossible to imagine that you would understand the history of the beat. And this kind of, I feel like the spirit of the question is like, well, how am I qualified for a job if I don't know the full industry? I think any hiring manager will understand that there is an up ramp of learning. It's just like showing your willingness to hustle and to get up to speed.
Burnett, you got an answer on that one?
Um,
How long did it take you to learn the history of the industries you cover, or
Forever. I'm still learning. I
I
mean,
feel like I've been in this industry for,
Yeah,
like I
like-
mentioned, 2 decades, and I'm still learning.
still every single day, every moment of every day, I am still learning. I am still, again, I watch a ton of, financial news. I read, I am very cozy with the Bloomberg reporters. And I ask them point blank sometimes. I remember I used to be like intimidated or scared. I'd be like, can I call the TL, it's team leader of the equities team, of the retail team? They're gonna think I'm such a ding dong, they think I'm a big time idiot. And then I was like, why? This is what they do. I'm sure they'll be delighted, for me to ask, tell me more. And it turns out, yeah, the latter was true. I'd call and I'd be like, oh, I'm senior producer. I'm so confused. And they'd be like, oh, no big deal. Let me tell you, this is why Tesla is doing this. You know what I mean? And they were excited to talk to me. And it was a very sort of one teamness. And so, never be afraid to ask the people who are covering the beat. This is their steak and potatoes. This is the meat of what they do. I bet you they'll be excited to share it with you.
Okay. And then Taylor, I'm going to pose the next question to you. The question in the chat is, what are some of your pet peeves with finding good sources? The fact that you're laughing.
I have a
Means
lot of pet peeves.
Go ahead.
I think one of the biggest one is when people say that, or when I reach out to someone and say I, am writing about X, Y, and Z. Can you speak to me about it? And they say yes, sure. And then we get on the phone and they then say, this is completely outside of my area of expertise. I really don't know much, or they'll say, I've read X, Y, and Z. Like, I don't want you to regurgitate to me like, other news stories. So that's probably the biggest pet peeve, is when people just like aren't transparent about what they are experts in.
And then Jordan, what are some of your pet peeves with finding good sources?
Oh, I feel like Taylor, like, oh, there's a list. I mean, I think it is it is really what you said, like, just making sure that they actually have the expert. I don't know, you got me on the
That's
spot
a
after a long day of pet peeve, so I don't know. I mean, I guess my real answer is, um, I try to be as transparent about what the conversation is gonna be and come as research as I can to a conversation. I would hope the sources as well and like understands what the framework of the conversation is so it can be productive.
Very quickly, guys, I got somebody on the call, our dearest Dharma, sent me a direct message, but I think she meant to send it like in all, like to all.
That's fine.
She asked if any of the panelists have written books or screenplays about their experiences.
That's
I've not
Oh,
written
so
anything.
fun.
My book is still
I've
being
not.
written.
I started a book, but it's not about experiences. It's like a personal, well, it'll have some experiences in there, but it's a personal finance book. But yeah, so the short answer for me is work in progress.
Love
But we
Maybe
all
one
probably
day.
have a book in us with stories. Okay,
sure.
I'll ask just one because I don't see any more questions in the chat. So I'll ask one final question to everybody on the panel. What's your message to either, it could be either to the next generation of business journalists or your advice to those who have to cover things that they're not familiar with, but is a part of the world of business? Who wants to start? I'm gonna pick somebody.
I can start.
Go ahead.
It, as we all know, it is not the sexiest, right? Like it is not the sexiest thing you could do. It is not entertainment, it's not politics, it's not sports. But it is important. It is impactful. I think you heard from all of us that we all like sort of had to learn when we got there and we continue to learn because maybe we didn't grow up in households, right? We were talking about these things all the time or come from households full of, heavy investors. But as our communities continue trying to build that generational wealth, we have to be the ones, right, to get into these spaces and start understanding how markets work, how investing works, how the business world affects us and our families and our pockets and our communities so that future generations can get these jobs and not feel like they're coming from a place of, just complete darkness. I had no idea. Growing up in a household where you're hearing about these things all the time will prepare you, of course, in your own personal lives to better handle your personal finances. And then if you want to get into business journalism, will help you better navigate some of these stories.
All right, great answer. Taylor, you got a response on this one?
Yes, for existing or practicing business journalists, I would say some of the best advice that I've ever gotten is that if there's a story that you don't fully understand, there's a good chance that like your readers don't understand it either. So that makes it even more worthy of digging into it. Or if you hear something from friends or whatever that you're not seeing being reported, but it seems silly, then if people are talking about it, then it needs to be out there. And so we need to be less afraid to bring things from like our communities that our colleagues who are from different backgrounds are talking about. We need to bring those things into the newsroom and onto our pages or onto our screens, because whenever I've taken that risk of bringing something up that seemed silly or completely out of left field compared to how other journalists were tackling a topic, it always ends up being a big success.
And Jordan, give the final word to you.
Awesome. I would just add that this is an extremely enriching beat to enter into to understand literally how the world works, which is money and power, which is business journalism. That is such a powerful story to tell. And we need more people who look like us, who tell those stories, who talk to people who aren't being reached out to. And so this industry, specifically business journalism, needs you. So very much consider it. I'm going to sign all of us up and say, reach out to any of the panelists and moderator. And we're happy to chat about it more with you if you're really interested.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're all accessible on LinkedIn. We're all have different social media access. So definitely feel free to reach out to all of us. I'll add a point too. Also, I think it helps to, if you don't start out with a passion, the passion can come along the way. For me, early on, again, I did it just because of the pay was better, honestly. But then I had a vision for addressing the spirit of poverty in the Black community. I do think the Black community has made progress, but we still have a long way to go compared to the majority. So I think us being in these environments helps, so I want to echo what Jordan says about we need more of us. With that, I just want to thank everyone for attending our business journalism panel, the NYABJ Business Journalism panel. We appreciate you all. I'm going to stop the recording now, and I'll give a couple more minutes after this if anyone has any other final thoughts. But thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you to our panelists, to Queenette, Taylor, and Jordan. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank
Oh,
you
yeah,
for
and
inviting
both-
us. This was